In the quiet heart of Ridgepoint's Winter Square, a disabled boy sat in his wheelchair, carefully folding paper models while his retired K9, a loyal German shepherd with years of heroism behind his eyes, rested faithfully at his side. It should have been a peaceful afternoon. It should have been safe, until two wealthy teens stepped into the cold light. Their laughter was sharp, their designer jackets gleaming with arrogance as they circled the boy like predators searching for weakness. The first insult stung, the shove to his wheelchair shook him, and when the older teen grabbed his paper model and crushed it under a spotless sneaker, the boy's fragile calm shattered. But the moment the retired K9 tried to protect him, the cruelty reached its peak. One brutal kick, one cry of pain, the entire square fell silent. What those boys didn't know was that an off-duty officer had already seen everything, and what happened next would change the town forever. Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us. Late winter wind swept quietly across Ridgepoint's small mountain square, carrying with it the faint scent of pine resin and the sharper chill that rolled down from the snow-packed ridges above the town. Beneath the slanted roof of the old public library, its stone walls weathered, its windows rattling softly with each gust, sat 12-year-old Navin Clift, a thin boy with dark chestnut hair that always seemed a little too long for his narrow face. His skin was pale, partly from the cold, and partly from the long months he had spent indoors after the accident that had taken the strength from his legs. There was a gentleness in his brown eyes, a quietness that did not come from shyness, but from watching the world more than speaking to it. His hands, though small and slightly trembling from the cold, moved with careful precision as he folded thin sheets of colored paper. Navin's wheelchair, a sturdy aluminum model donated by a local charity, squeaked faintly whenever he shifted. The boy had learned to ignore that sound long ago. What mattered was that his hands could still move, still create, still bring something beautiful into a world that had once felt shattered. Paper models had become his sanctuary, a way to shape order and delicate beauty out of a life that sometimes felt chaotic and unfair. Beside him lay Calder, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat and warm, honey-colored eyes lined by darker fur that gave him a wise, almost solemn expression. Calder's build was powerful but not bulky. His body had the quiet solidity of a dog trained for real work. Before retiring, he had served in Ridgepoint's K9 Search and Recovery Unit, crawling into storm-damaged cabins and avalanche pockets to pull survivors out. His left ear had a small notch across the tip, a scar from a rescue mission during a windstorm 3 years earlier, a reminder of how fiercely he had once served. Though retired, Calder still carried himself like a working dog, alert posture, steady breathing, gaze constantly moving. But around Navin something softened. Each time the boy bent forward to retrieve a fallen scrap of paper, Calder leaned protectively closer, lowering his head as though bracing to shield him from the cold or any unseen danger. Navin felt that presence, that quiet companionship with every breath. In his mind, Calder wasn't just a dog, he was a sworn guardian, a silent witness to struggles that others didn't fully understand. For months after the accident, when Navin had woken from nightmares reliving the screech of metal, and the moment everything went dark, Calder had been the first warm shape he felt against his hand. Those nights, the shepherd would lie pressed against the bed, ears twitching, breath steady and grounding. Today, though the wind bit harder than usual, Navin felt calm. He folded the final crease of his paper ship, the tiny model now balanced between his fingers, like a fragile dream suddenly made real, creating. It filled his chest with a small but stable warmth, an emotion he had been trying to rebuild since losing the ability to run, climb trees, or chase the older kids down the bike trail the way he once had. He looked up just as Calder lifted one heavy paw and rested it on the frame of the wheelchair. It was a gesture Calder had performed since the hospital days, a soft and steadying touch that seemed to whisper, "You're not alone, kid." The weight of that paw, though light, made Naven feel anchored to the earth in a way his legs no longer could. The square around them remained mostly empty at this hour. A few townspeople hurried along the sidewalk, bundled in scarves and thick jackets, boots crunching lightly over patches of old frost. Across the square, Mrs. Sarah Bladen, the gray-haired librarian with a tall, willowy frame and a warm voice softened by years of storytime readings, stepped out briefly to shake dust from an old doormat. She gave Naven a fond nod. She had always admired the boy's patience and delicate craftsmanship, and then slipped back inside before the cold wind could chase her. Naven returned to his paper ship, setting it gently atop the wooden bench beside him. His hands lingered on it longer than necessary. There was pride in his expression, but also a shadow of longing, an inward ache that wished he could stand, hold it up to the wind, and race it across the square like other kids might. The ache didn't make him bitter, it simply made him quiet. Calder shifted, sensing something subtle in the boy's posture. He rose to his feet, circled once, then settled beside Naven with a small groan, his fur brushing against the wheelchair's metal edge. The warmth of the dog's body seeped through Naven's coat, soothing him better than any blanket could. Naven exhaled slowly and let his fingers sink into Calder's coat, feeling the familiar coarse softness. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice gentle but threaded with gratitude. Calder's tail thumped once, the sound dull against the wooden planks beneath them. The wind softened for a moment, letting silence settle again. In that fragile quiet, Naven felt something like peace, thin, delicate, but real. He didn't know the storm that would soon unravel that peace. For now he only leaned closer to the shepherd at his side, unaware that this calm was the last gentle moment before the cruelty of others would test both his courage and Calder's loyalty. And somewhere beyond the library steps, fate was already beginning to shift. From the edge of Ridgepoint's small winter-stiffened park, two tall figures drifted into view, like shadows cast too sharply under the pale afternoon sun. Jace Whitlock walked slightly ahead, his posture loose but dripping with the arrogance of someone who had never felt the weight of consequence. At 17, Jace stood lean and athletic, with sharp cheekbones, a clean-shaven jaw, and dark blonde hair styled with deliberate carelessness. His slate-blue eyes held that cold glimmer common among boys raised to believe the world bent naturally toward their wants. His father owned Whitlock Timber and Development, the biggest employer in Ridgepoint, and Jace carried that power in the tilt of his chin, in the dismissive huff he gave whenever something or someone failed to interest him. Beside him strode Ryder Hale, older by a year and broader in the shoulders, built like a teen athlete who expected applause simply for existing. Ryder's dark hair fell in carefully messy curls, and his sharp brown eyes scanned the square with restless boredom. His father ran Ridgepoint's luxury resort, and Ryder had inherited not only his father's money, but also his entitlement. The two boys had a reputation around town, never formally punished, always just joking, always someone else cleaning up after their trouble. They didn't walk through the square, they prowled it, looking for entertainment. Both wore expensive winter jackets stitched with logos recognizable only to families who paid for private ski instructors. Their shoes were pristine, untouched by the mud or slush common in the town's winter months. To them, Ridgepoint wasn't a community. It was a backdrop, something to use, mock, and forget. Calder noticed them first. The German shepherd's ears pricked, his muscles hardening subtly under his sable coat. His amber eyes tracked the boys as they veered toward the library's awning, where Naven Clift, with his paper models and quiet innocence, sat unaware of the approaching storm. Calder let out a soft rumble, low and steady, the kind of warning hum that came from deep instinct, an instinct honed across years of disaster zones, collapsed attics, and rescue missions where hesitation meant death. But Naven didn't notice the shift, not immediately. He had just set the last folded paper bird on the bench beside him, and a tiny, proud smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The boy's delicate fingers brushed the wing of the model, almost reverently, before he turned to check if Calder needed warming from the cold. Instead, he found Calder's gaze locked forward, his paw now pressing slightly firmer against the wheelchair frame. Naven blinked, confused, then followed the shepherd's stare. By the time his eyes landed on Jace and Ryder, the boys were already close, too close. Jace smirked, lips twitching upward in an expression dripping with mockery. "Well, Ryder," he said, voice smooth but hollow, "look what we've got here, little winter arts and crafts session." Ryder snorted, his laugh loud and sharp. "Perfect for my page," he said, patting his phone already set to record. "People love inspirational stuff, especially when it's pathetic." Naven's throat tightened. He hated when strangers stared at his chair before they looked at him. He hated how their eyes flicked to the metal rims or the footplates and then back to his face as though silently calculating what he couldn't do. Naven's stomach clenched with that old familiar anxiety, the kind that whispered memories of flashing lights, twisted steel, and the moment he realized he couldn't feel his legs anymore. Now that fear rose again, faint but sharp, curling around his ribs like cold fog. Jace, seeing the hesitation in the boy's eyes, stepped closer and flicked the wheelchair's front wheel with the side of his shoe, careful enough not to leave a mark, yet cruel enough to jar the chair slightly. "Nice ride," he taunted. "Looks expensive." It wasn't, Naven murmured, barely audible over the wind. Ryder didn't wait for further interaction. With a sudden lunge, he snatched the paper model from Naven's hands. The movement was quick, practiced, almost predatory. "Oh, wow," Ryder said, turning it around mockingly. "Look at this, a paper boat. That's adorable." "Please," Naven tried, reaching forward, but his movements were slow, limited. Ryder tossed the model into the air and clapped loudly when it fell into a shallow puddle from melted frost. The thin paper soaked instantly, sinking like a wounded creature. The boy laughed triumphantly, pleased with the reaction he expected to see in Naven's eyes. But Naven didn't cry out. He just froze. His fingers curled in on themselves, trembling slightly. It wasn't just the ruined model, it was the feeling he always feared most, being powerless in the face of cruelty. Calder moved before Naven could even breathe. The shepherd stepped forward, planting his paws firmly on the wet stone. His lips pulled back ever so slightly, revealing a flash of teeth, not threatening, but unmistakably protective. His deep growl vibrated through the air, low and resonant. Ryder's smile faltered for half a second before he forced a laugh. "Oh, look, Jace. The guard dog thinks he's some kind of hero." Jace leaned forward, studying Calder with a smirk. "That's a retired canine, right? I've seen him around." His eyes narrowed, calculating. "Old dog like that shouldn't be so jumpy." Calder didn't break posture. His gaze was sharp, unblinking, his tail stiff and low, a perfect display of defensive focus. Naven swallowed hard and reached for Calder's collar, his voice unsteady. "Calder, it's okay, please." "You named your dog Calder?" Ryder laughed harshly. "Sounds like a butler." But all humor drained from Naven's face. He wasn't embarrassed. He was afraid. He felt the storm. Breaking open, felt the old ache of helplessness, pressing down on him like the first time he woke in the hospital. Legs numb, future uncertain. Jace leaned in closer, his breath cold against the air. "What's wrong, kid? You scared we'll break your little crafts again?" Ryder lifted his phone. "Smile for the camera." Calder stepped forward sharply, and the boys jerked back, startled despite their bravado. The shepherd's chest rumbled like distant thunder. Naven's heart hammered. He knew what this moment meant. He knew nothing good came after that kind of laughter. He knew they were about to push harder, Cruelty always escalated. The cold wind swept across the square again, sharper this time, as though the mountains themselves sensed what was coming. And in that breathless, tightening moment, the peace of Ridgepoint finally shattered. Calder's paws scraped against the cold stone as he bent down, jaws gentle around the soaked, ruined paper model. The German shepherd's breath came in small white clouds in the cold air, and his ears flattened at the edges, not from fear but from the disappointment of having failed to protect something Navin treasured. His 7-year-old body still carried the strength of a working K9, but there was a stiffness to his steps, a lingering reminder of years spent crawling through debris and freezing cliffsides during rescue missions. As he turned to return the broken model to Navin, a sudden furious hiss escaped Jace's throat. "You think you're better than me?" Jace snapped, jaw tightening, the muscles at the sides of his face twitching with irritation. His pale blue eyes flashed with a kind of wounded pride, a dangerous mix of immaturity and entitlement. Before Navin could react, before Ryder could even process the shift, Jace stepped forward with a burst of anger. His foot arced sharply, and the impact slammed into Calder's ribs with a brutal, sickening thud. The square froze. Calder's yelp cut through the air, short, strangled, a sound that twisted itself into the cold wind and crawled straight into Navin's chest. The shepherd's legs buckled beneath him, and his body collapsed sideways onto the icy pavement, his breath splintering into painful gasps. "Calder!" Navin cried. He pushed his wheels forward, but the uneven stones caught beneath one side, halting him with a jolting stop that sent fear rising like fire up his spine. His fingers fumbled at the rims, palms slick with forming sweat despite the cold, but the chair refused to budge over the gap. Calder, trembling, lifted his head toward him. Even in pain, even shuddering, the dog's honey-colored eyes held only one message for the boy. "I'm here. Don't be scared." But Navin was terrified and furious and helpless in a way only a child trapped in a body that refused to obey could understand. His throat tightened and his breath came out in broken gasps. Memories of the car accident flashed through his mind, the crushing weight of metal, the smell of burned wiring. The moment he realized nothing below his waist responded. This moment wasn't the same, but the helplessness stabbed him with a familiar cruelty. Around them, the square fell utterly silent. Even the wind seemed to falter. Ryder stepped back, eyes wide, a nervous tremor betraying the bravado he had moments before. "Dude, I didn't think you'd kick him that hard." Jace swallowed, his arrogance flickering. His shoulders rose with a tense breath, but he forced a shrug, masking the crack in his confidence. "He got in my way." But the sound of footsteps, heavy and rapid, shattered his excuse. "Stay where you are. Don't move." The voice cut through the cold like a blade made of winter steel. All 3 boys, and even Calder, turned toward the sound. Officer Patrick Rowan strode across the square with the purpose of someone who had spent years running into danger rather than away from it. At 34, Patrick had broad shoulders shaped by search and rescue missions, a square jaw darkened by day-old stubble, and storm-gray eyes that had seen too much loss to tolerate cruelty. His dark brown hair, slightly mussed as if he'd been mid-run, brushed the edge of his forehead. He wore no hat despite the cold. Patrick rarely noticed discomfort when his attention had locked onto something serious. He had been jogging along the ridge path above the square when he heard Calder's cry. The same kind of cry he'd once heard in the mountains during a failed rescue attempt that had left a deep scar inside him. Since that day, Patrick reacted instinctively to sounds of distress, especially from animals he had trained or people who were vulnerable. That instinct now burned in his expression. Ryder stumbled backward, hands half raised. "Officer Rowan, look, it wasn't just anything," Patrick snapped as he approached, each word clipped with restrained fury. "It was an unprovoked attack." His gaze swept between the boys, then down to Calder, then finally to Navin, whose hands were still gripping the wheels of his stuck chair, knuckles white. Patrick crouched quickly beside Naven, touching the boy's shoulder with a steady but gentle hand. "You hurt anywhere?" he asked, voice softer now. Naven shook his head rapidly. No, but Calder." "I see him," Patrick said, his tone shifting back to cold focus. He moved to Calder with the familiarity of someone who had trained the dog since his early days in the K9 unit. Patrick slid his fingers lightly along Calder's swollen side. The shepherd winced and released a quiet whine. It made something old and painful tighten behind Patrick's ribs. He stood, eyes hardening as he turned toward Jace and Ryder. "You two assaulted a disabled minor and injured a retired service dog. That is not a prank." Jace straightened his jacket, trying to reclaim some of his fading dominance. "It was an accident," he muttered. "No," Patrick answered sharply. "An accident is slipping on ice. What you did was a choice." A few townspeople had begun to gather, drawn by the sudden tension. An elderly man in a thick wool coat, a mother with a toddler strapped to her chest, and a delivery driver with snowflakes caught in his beard. Each paused, watching the scene unfold with disbelief. Ryder's voice cracked slightly. "We didn't know he was, important." Patrick stepped closer and the two teens shrank back unconsciously. "You don't need to know a dog's resume to know not to kick him," Patrick said. His words were low but carried the force of someone who had long ago sworn to protect not just the law but the vulnerable. He knelt beside Calder again, and Calder pressed his muzzle weakly against Patrick's wrist. The officer exhaled once, steadying his breath. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "We're getting you help." Naven wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. Calder's pain struck him harder than anything the boys had said. It twisted something deep inside, the belief that maybe, just maybe, the world could be kind if he stayed small and quiet. That belief cracked now. Patrick rose and gestured sharply to the teens. "Stand over there, hands where I can see them." Jace clenched his jaw. "You can't talk to us like that." Patrick's eyes were ice. "I can, and I will. Your father's companies don't outrank the law." The tension in the air thickened. Calder shifted, trying to sit up, but Patrick gently pressed him back down. "Not yet, buddy." And as the officer radioed for assistance, as the townspeople whispered, as the cold wind wrapped itself around the broken quiet of the square, Naven felt something shift in him. A movement, not physical but emotional, like a small flame catching despite the storm. He watched Jace and Ryder shrink beneath the weight of consequences, watched Patrick stand firm, watched Calder still fighting to protect him even while injured. For the first time since his accident, Naven felt he wasn't entirely helpless. Someone was standing for him. Someone was fighting back. The square remained silent, holding its breath as the consequences began to unfold. Cold wind knifed across Ridgepoint Square as Officer Patrick Rowan knelt beside Calder, his broad frame blocking some of the chill from the trembling German shepherd. The dog's thick sable coat, once a shield against countless mountain storms, now shivered with every shallow breath he took. Patrick's gloved hand moved gently along Calder's ribcage, his fingertips tracing the painful reaction, the tense flinch, the wince, the low, broken whine that came from deep within the dog's chest. The sound carved into Patrick with merciless familiarity. He had heard it before, during the avalanche rescue on Avalon Ridge years ago, when an injured K9 tried to keep working even with a cracked rib. Calder's stoic endurance mirrored that memory so intensely that for a moment Patrick's jaw tightened, and the cold intensified behind his eyes. Naven clutched Calder's paw, his thin arms shaking, his face pale against the harsh winter light. His dark chestnut hair hung loose near his cheeks, catching the wind as he whispered to Calder, voice trembling and thin, "I'm here, boy, I'm here." The boy's wheelchair sat unevenly on the stone path, one wheel lodged against the raised edge of a frost-warped slab. Patrick steadied himself, then reached for Calder's collar. The metal tag was cold beneath his thumb, its edges worn from years of service. He rotated it slowly, expecting to see the standard identification, but instead found 4 lines engraved with reverence and weight. His breath froze. K9 Calder, Unit 3, Rescue and Recovery Medal, Silver Climb Tunnel Collapse, 6 survivors. For a moment, Patrick didn't speak. He simply stared at the tag, the memory slamming into him. He had been one of the responders in that disaster. Though not Calder's direct handler at the time, he had witnessed the shepherd drag himself through unstable debris to reach trapped workers, refusing to exit the tunnel even after inhaling dust and taking a blow to the shoulder. Patrick lifted his head slowly, his storm-gray eyes sharpening as he turned toward the gathering crowd. Faces had formed a tense semicircle, townspeople bundled in scarves and winter jackets, their breaths hanging like pale ghosts in the air. A woman with silver braids tucked under a knitted cap, a local art teacher named Mira Harrow, brought a hand to her mouth, her weathered skin, pale from years spent working indoors on paintings, tightened with shock. "That dog. He saved my cousin that day," she whispered, tears forming. A bearded man with a delivery uniform, Cole Stafford, known around town for his gruff voice but surprisingly kind demeanor, shifted uncomfortably, his thick eyebrows lifting. "I heard the story," he muttered. "Didn't know it was him." Murmurs spread like wind through pine needles. "That's the K9 from the tunnel collapse? I thought he left the unit. He shouldn't even be standing after a kick like that." Navin's fingers tightened around Calder's fur. His voice cracked as he looked up at Patrick. "He saved me too," he whispered, emotion gathering in his throat. "Last year, when it crashed on the ridge road." Patrick looked at the boy fully now. Navin's thin shoulders, the trembling in his jaw, the fear buried beneath his soft brown eyes. The crowd leaned in as the boy continued. "The door was crushed. I was stuck. Calder squeezed inside. The gap was tiny, and he stayed with me. He braced himself so the metal wouldn't crush me more. He kept me warm until the rescuers came. He saved me." Calder let out a weak huff, pressing his muzzle into the boy's palm, as though comforting him despite his own pain. The square fell completely silent. Even the winter wind seemed to hesitate. Patrick rose slowly, his tall frame radiating a cold fury, the kind forged by years of loss, responsibility, and a past failure he had never forgiven himself for, when a little boy had died in a house collapse he couldn't reach in time. That event had sharpened Patrick into a protector with zero tolerance for cruelty, especially toward the vulnerable. He turned on Jace and Ryder. "You didn't just kick a dog," Patrick said, his voice low, heavy with restrained emotion. "You attacked a decorated rescue K9. You attacked a dog that saved lives." Jace's face lost its color, his pale blue eyes flickering in panic. His body stiffened despite the bravado he tried to maintain. His hands twitched inside his expensive jacket pockets. Ryder took a step back, shoulders hunching, his earlier confidence evaporating into the cold. Patrick's gaze narrowed. "Look at him. Look at what you did." He gestured at Calder's trembling body. "This is not a joke. This is cruelty and cowardice." A gust of wind whirled through the square, scattering brittle pine needles across the stone. It felt like the mountains themselves were bearing witness. Then Patrick lifted the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Rowan," he said, voice steady but hard. "I have an injured retired service K9 and a disabled minor who has been targeted by 2 teenage offenders, requesting immediate veterinary support and backup at Ridgepoint Square." Static crackled, then a confirmation responded. Patrick lowered the radio and looked at the boys again. "You're staying here," he said. "You're not running, not today." Ryder swallowed. We didn't know he was, important." Patrick cut him off sharply. "You don't need to know someone's importance to treat them with basic decency." Jace opened his mouth to retort, but Patrick's glare froze the words on his tongue. The crowd murmured in agreement. Mira folded her arms tightly. Cole Stafford shook his head with a low, disappointed grunt. Behind Patrick, Calder tried to lift his head again. The effort made his muscles tremble violently. Naven leaned closer, whispering softly, "Don't move, Calder, please. Help's coming." Patrick knelt once more, placing a steady hand between Calder's ears. "You're a strong one," he murmured. "Just hold on." The shepherd's eyes drifted closed for a moment, trusting. The square held its breath as the faint wail of a distant emergency siren began to rise from beyond the ridge. The truth of Calder's past now lay exposed in the cold winter air, a truth that wrapped the town in shock, shame, and a growing fire for justice. And as Patrick stood protectively between Naven and the two trembling boys, he knew the coming moments would decide what Ridgepoint truly stood for. The wail of the emergency siren cut through the winter-still square as the Ridgepoint Veterinary Rescue van pulled up beside the library steps. Its white exterior reflected the pale afternoon sun, the blue LED lights flickering against the frost-bitten pavement. Two rescue workers jumped out immediately, their boots thudding heavily as they hurried toward Patrick and the trembling shepherd. The first was Liam Harbridge, a compact man in his early 40s with sandy hair cropped short and a neatly trimmed beard peppered with gray. His sturdy frame and calm, steady gaze revealed years spent handling panicked animals and devastated owners. Lines curved around his hazel eyes, lines carved not by age but by compassion. Liam knelt beside Calder with practiced care, murmuring softly, his voice low and reassuring. The second rescuer, Tara Glenn, moved with the quick precision of someone who had grown up around emergencies. She was in her late 20s, tall and slender, with auburn hair tied into a tight braid that brushed her jacket collar. Her pale skin contrasted sharply with the crimson tones of her hair, and faint freckles dotted her cheeks. Tara's calm professionalism came from her past. She'd once lost her own dog to an untreated injury, a trauma that had shaped her into a fiercely dedicated veterinary technician. She laid out equipment with rapid efficiency, blankets, straps, and a portable stretcher padded with thermal lining. Calder tried to lift his head, but the movement sent a ripple of pain across his body. Liam gently placed a hand against the shepherd's neck. "Easy, buddy, we've got you now." Naven reached out, clutching Calder's paw, small fingers gripping thick fur. The boy's face was streaked with tears and pale from fear, but a spark of determination shone in his eyes. As Tara and Liam lifted Calder onto the stretcher, securing him with careful hands, Naven whispered through trembling lips, "Please don't leave me. You're always strong." Calder's tail moved weakly, a soft, barely there tap against the stretcher, his way of answering. Patrick stepped aside, his tall figure tense with concern, yet steady as stone. "Let Naven ride with you," he said. His voice held no room for disagreement. Tara nodded, opening the back doors of the van. Inside, the mobile treatment bay hummed with warmth from portable heaters. As Naven maneuvered his wheelchair up the small ramp, with Patrick helping push from behind, the boy leaned forward, his thin hands smoothing Calder's fur. "I'm right here," he murmured. "I won't go anywhere." The van door closed, sealing them in a gentle golden light. Patrick watched it pull away, his jaw tightening before turning toward the crowd. And the boy. Jace Whitlock and Ryder Hale stood near the benches now, surrounded by their parents, figures who had arrived in a rush of frantic footsteps, expensive coats, and stunned expressions. Jace's mother, Vivian. Whitlock, a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and glossy black hair pinned in a sleek twist, looked mortified. Her features, usually composed with the cold poise of old money, trembled faintly. She placed a hand on her son's shoulder, but Jace wouldn't meet her gaze. Beside her, Mark Whitlock, Jace's father, a heavy-set man with a salt-and-pepper beard and stern features, rubbed his temple, his face a mixture of anger and shame. Ryder's parents stood nearby, Garrick Hale, a broad-shouldered man with a rugged outdoor complexion and a rough, dark beard he hadn't trimmed that morning, and Elena Hale, petite with carefully styled blonde curls and eyes red-rimmed with disbelief. Garrick's jaw clenched as he stared at his son, and Elena silently wiped away the mascara smudges forming beneath her lashes. Patrick stepped forward, snow crunching beneath his boots. His storm-gray eyes swept from the boys to their parents. "Your sons assaulted a disabled minor and injured a decorated service K9, he said plainly. His voice carried across the square, steady, unyielding. "There are witnesses, there is video, there is injury. This will not disappear." No one argued, not a single word rose in defense. Patrick continued, "Ridgepoint does not ignore cruelty. If we allow it in our children, we allow it in our future, and I won't permit that." The officer's expression hardened. They will face legal consequences. They will answer for what they've done. Ryder bowed his head, shoulders shaking. Jace stared at the ground, his pale blue eyes losing all their arrogance, replaced by a dawning fear. Garrick Hale spoke first, his voice hoarse. "Officer, we'll cooperate fully. No excuses." Vivian nodded stiffly, pride forced aside by a mother's shame. "Whatever needs to be done, we won't stand in the way." Mark Whitlock sighed, rubbing his beard with a trembling hand. "Jace, we raised you better than this." Patrick said nothing more. The weight of justice was already settling in. Hours later, at the Ridgepoint Veterinary Clinic, the quiet hum of machinery was broken only by the rhythmic sound of Calder's breathing. The treatment room smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine-scented cleaning solution. Naven sat beside the padded recovery bed, both hands wrapped around Calder's paw. The shepherd now lay cocooned in soft bandages, his ribcage rising and falling with steady rhythm. The attending veterinarian, Dr. Emery Holt, a tall man with graying hair at his temples and warm hazel eyes behind rectangular glasses, gave his final assessment with a gentle reassurance. Dr. Holt had a thin, scholarly build and a soft-spoken demeanor shaped by a past filled with tending to injured wildlife in Colorado's mountain sanctuaries. "He's strong, bruised ribs, yes, but no fractures. He'll recover." Naven let out a shaky breath, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. Calder stirred, nudging his muzzle against the boy's wrist. When Patrick entered, the scent of cold air followed him. His heavy boots echoed softly before he crouched beside Naven. The officer's broad face softened. "He's going to be okay," Patrick said. Naven looked up at him, eyes glassy but hopeful. "He's a hero, right?" Patrick placed a steady hand on the boy's thin shoulder. "Yes," he said, "but today, so are you." Naven blinked, confused. Patrick continued, voice low. "You stayed with him. You didn't run. You protected him with everything you had. That's courage, Naven, the kind that doesn't need legs to stand tall." Outside the clinic window, the sky glowed with a deep violet sunset, purple clouds wrapping around the distant ridge like a curtain closing on the longest day of winter. The fading light cast a soft, warm halo around Naven and Calder, binding boy and dog in a moment untouched by pain or fear. And as the world dimmed into evening, the lesson of the day lingered quietly in the room. Strength is not measured by fists or legs, but by whom we choose to stand up for, especially when they cannot stand for themselves. In the quiet glow of that violet evening, something far greater than justice settled over Ridgepoint. It felt like a whisper, gentle, steady, almost sacred, a reminder that in the darkest moments when cruelty tries to break the spirit of the weak, God still sends his miracles in the form of loyal hearts, brave souls, and unexpected protectors. Calder wasn't just a dog. He was proof that God's grace often walks beside us on four paws. Naven wasn't just a boy in a wheelchair. He was living testimony that courage does not come from the body, but from the soul God breathes into each of us. And Officer Patrick wasn't just a man doing his duty. He was the kind of guardian heaven places quietly in a small town so that kindness never loses its voice. Life is full of days where we feel small, unseen, or powerless. But stories like these remind us that God still moves through ordinary moments, through fragile hands and trembling hearts, restoring hope where it's fading, lighting a path where shadows gather. So if you're watching this today, may this story lift your spirit, warm your heart, and remind you that you are never alone, because God walks with you, even on the coldest days. May He bless you, protect you, and guide you through every trial ahead. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles that still happen around us every day. May God bless you and your family, today, tomorrow, and always.